I'm not the type of person who usually believes in the supernatural. I've always been a skeptic, someone who thinks everything has a logical explanation. But what happened to me a few years ago? Well, I can't ignore the possibility that there are things we just can't explain. It all started when I moved into a new apartment. I had just gotten a job downtown and needed a cheap place to live. I found this apartment in an old building, one of those really old ones with narrow hallways and walls that seemed to absorb sound. But the rent was great, and the location was perfect, so I signed the lease without a second thought. From the very first week, I began to notice some strange things. Nothing alarming at first, just a feeling that the place was darker than it should be, even during the day. There was a constant smell of mold that seemed to seep out of the walls. I tried to ignore these details and focus on decorating my new home. I had a normal routine, work during the day, gym afterward, and I'd come back home at night, so I didn't spend much time there during the day. But one thing caught my attention from the start: a small window at the end of the hallway on my floor. It was a tiny window, barely big enough for someone to peek through, and it was always slightly open. I found it odd because the hallway had no exit, and the window faced directly onto a brick wall of the building next door. So, why was that window there? And why was it always open? On the first night, as I was lying in bed, I heard something. Footsteps. Slowly, moving back and forth in the hallway outside my apartment. They sounded like the footsteps of an old person, shuffling along. I got up, my heart pounding, thinking it might be a neighbor. I waited a moment, but the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I stood still, listening intently. Then the footsteps began again, but now they were moving toward the end of the hallway, where the window was. After a few minutes, there was silence again. I stood there for a long time, trying to understand what had happened. Maybe it was just someone with insomnia, I thought. But the next night, it happened again. And then again the night after. Always at the same time, around 2 in the morning. The footsteps started at my door, went to the window, and stopped. I began to feel a growing anxiety every night, waiting for the footsteps. I tried listening to music, putting on headphones, but nothing helped. I knew they were there. After a week, my curiosity overcame my fear. I decided I needed to know who it was. One night, I waited for the footsteps to start, and when I heard the first sounds, I slowly opened the door, trying not to make a sound. The hallway was dark, dimly lit by a flickering light near the window. And then I saw it. A figure standing with its back to me, right in front of the window. It was a man, I think. He was wearing dark clothes, and I couldn't see his face. Just his silhouette standing out against the faint light from the window. He was motionless, as if he were looking at the brick wall of the building next door. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I decided to speak to him. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Didn't move. I took a step closer, trying to see his face, but as soon as I moved, he vanished. He didn't run, didn't turn around. He just vanished, like he was swallowed by the darkness. I ran back into my apartment, my heart racing. I locked the door and stayed up until dawn, unable to sleep. The next day, I was exhausted, but I knew I needed answers. I went to talk to one of my neighbors, an elderly man who always sat by the building entrance. I asked if he knew anything strange about the floor, described what I had seen. He looked at me for a long moment and then said something that sent chills down my spine. "You saw the tenant of 4C, then," he said, almost as if he was talking to himself. I asked who this tenant was, and he told me the story. He said that about 20 years ago, a man lived in 4C, the same floor as mine. He was a lonely man, never spoke to anyone, and had this strange habit of staring out the hallway window every night, always at 2 in the morning. One day, without any apparent reason, he jumped out of that window. Since then, some residents have reported hearing footsteps in the hallway at night, but no one had ever seen anything. The old man advised me to avoid going out of my apartment at night and, if possible, to move to another building. I returned to my apartment feeling a bit ridiculous, but the fear was there, growing. That night, around 2 in the morning, I heard the footsteps again. This time, I didn't get up. I just lay in bed, listening, as the footsteps moved from my door to the window. Weeks passed, and the footsteps continued. I began to notice other strange things, too. Objects that I was sure I had left in one place would appear in another. Lights would flicker for no reason, and I started having weird dreams of a man looking out the window, always with his back to me. In one of the dreams, he turned around, and I woke up with a scream caught in my throat. I never saw his face, but I felt like he was smiling. I finally decided to move out. I left that apartment on a rainy morning, feeling a mix of relief and fear. On the last day, as I carried the last box to my car, I looked back at the building and saw something that made my blood run cold. The window, that window at the end of the hallway, was wide open, swaying gently in the wind. I still pass by that street occasionally, and every time I look at the building, I see the window. Always slightly open. Sometimes, I feel like someone is standing there, looking out. Waiting. I don't know what he's waiting for, but I know I never want to find out.
I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but I need to get this off my chest. And maybe find someone who's gone through something similar. Since all of this started happening, I've felt like I'm losing my mind. But the more I try to ignore it, the worse things seem to get. It all began about a month ago. It was a Friday night, and I went out with a few friends to a new bar in the downtown area. Nothing special, just one of those bars you only find if you know exactly where to look, tucked away on a side street with no sign, poorly lit entrance. We wanted to get out of the usual routine, try something new, so we thought it would be fun. The night was pleasant, kind of cool, perfect for a drink. We got there around 9 p.m. and started drinking. I'm not much of a drinker, but that night everyone seemed to be in the mood. The conversations were flowing, there was a lot of laughter, and somehow, I ended up drinking more than I usually would. I don't remember exactly how many drinks I had, but I remember the last thing I did before leaving was to order one last whiskey. My friends were ready to call it a night, so I decided to order an Uber and head home. What I remember clearly is getting into the car. The driver seemed friendly, and the ride was smooth. But suddenly, I started feeling an overwhelming sleepiness. It was like something was pulling me into a deep sleep, and the last thing I remember is seeing the city lights passing by the window. The next morning, I woke up in my bed with a pounding headache. The hangover was brutal, the kind that makes everything hurt. I looked to the side, my phone was blinking with notifications. I picked up the device and saw there were several messages sent from my number to an unknown number. At first, I thought I might have texted someone from the bar, maybe a friend I didn't remember meeting, or maybe it was just a typo. But when I opened the chat, I felt a chill down my spine. The messages were disturbing. All sent by me, but I had no memory of typing any of them. The first one said, "I'm on the street now." Then, "I think someone is following me." With each new message, my stomach tightened more. They became increasingly specific. "The guy in the hat, he's behind me. I think he knows where I live." I stopped breathing for a moment, trying to make sense of what was happening. I kept reading, and the messages continued describing things I didn't remember experiencing. "I'm almost home. Need to get inside fast. He's really close now." For a moment, I thought someone might be playing a prank on me, but what was scarier was that there were responses in the chat. I couldn't see the content of the replies, they were all erased, like temporary messages that had disappeared. My heart was racing, my mind was trying to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. I decided to call the number. I tried several times, but the call immediately dropped, like the number didn't exist or was out of service. I started to feel more paranoid. I checked my call and text history to see if there was anything that could explain this, but there was nothing unusual. In the days that followed, I tried to forget about it, convincing myself that it must have been some sort of joke or a digital mix-up, but then, the messages came back. Always around 3 in the morning. My phone would vibrate, and when I looked, there it was. Can you hear me? The first time, I tried to ignore it, turned off my phone, but the next night, at 3 on the dot, another message arrived, look out the window. My whole body stiffened. I was in my bed, the room dark, and I felt fear creeping over me. Something in me wanted to open the window, but the dread was stronger. I decided to wait, frozen, listening to the silence. Another message, he's there. Don't let him in. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to grab a knife from the kitchen and lock all the doors. I decided not to look out the window, at least not that night. But the next night, the message came back. And the night after that. And the night after that. Always at 3 in the morning, like some macabre clock. After a week without sleeping properly, I finally gave in. At 3 on the dot, when the next message arrived, I slowly walked to the window. I opened a crack, my heart pounding so hard I could feel the blood pulsing in my temples. I looked outside. The street was deserted, only the trees swaying in the wind. There was no one. I felt a mix of relief and shame for having been so scared, but when I turned back to the room, another message arrived, you shouldn't have looked. At that moment, I knew something was very wrong. I tried to block the number, changed my SIM card, but the messages kept coming. Even now, every night at 3 in the morning, my phone vibrates with a message from that unknown number. I even thought about moving, but I know it won't help. Whoever, or whatever, it is, it's everywhere. And the worst part? Last night, while I was walking home, I saw a man in a hat watching me from across the street. He smiled. And I knew, at that moment, he knew exactly where I was.
I've always had a thing for old stuff, objects that have a history, a past that you can almost feel when you touch them. My mom used to say I had an old soul, and maybe she's right. But now I wish I had never accepted that mirror. It all started when my great-aunt passed away and left some things to the family. I didn't know her very well. She was a reclusive woman who lived in a big old house, full of things she had collected over her life. When she died, my mom was in charge of cleaning out the house and distributing her belongings among the relatives. And that's how I ended up with the mirror. It was an old mirror, Victorian-looking, with a dark wooden frame, intricately carved with flowers and leaves. The glass was slightly darkened, as if time had left a layer of shadows and stories over it. I thought it was beautiful in a kind of hypnotic way, and I decided to hang it in my bedroom right on the wall opposite my bed. At first, the mirror seemed like just an interesting decorative piece. But after a few days, I began to notice some strange things. Little details, almost imperceptible, that left me feeling uneasy. Sometimes when I walked past the mirror, it seemed like my reflection was delayed, like it was taking a second longer to move. Other times the reflection looked blurry, like I was looking through fogged glass. But the night that really changed everything happened about a week after I hung the mirror. I was getting ready for bed, and as I looked at the mirror, I noticed that my reflection blinked. That would be normal, except I hadn't blinked. I stood there staring, trying to understand what was happening. I blinked again, and my reflection smiled at me. A strange smile, too wide, that didn't look like mine. My heart raced and I stepped back from the mirror, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe I was imagining things. But the feeling of fear started growing inside me, something I couldn't explain. I decided I needed proof. I had to know if I was losing my mind or if there was really something wrong with that mirror. I grabbed my phone, set it to record, and left it facing the mirror while I slept. I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling like someone was watching me, but the fatigue overwhelmed me, and I fell back asleep. The next morning, with trembling hands, I picked up the phone and watched the video. For the first few minutes, nothing unusual, just the reflection of the room in the mirror. But then I saw it. My reflection started to move even though I was lying still in bed. It turned its head, like it was looking at something behind me. Then it began to step out of the mirror, putting one foot out, then the other until it was standing beside my bed. and there it stayed watching me as I slept. Terror filled me and I turned off the video not knowing what to think. I immediately took the mirror down, carried it to the backyard, and smashed it into 1,000 pieces with a hammer. Each blow made my heart race faster, but at the same time I felt a growing sense of relief. But that relief was short-lived. When I returned to my room that afternoon, the mirror was there, hanging on the wall as if it had never been touched. I screamed, but there was no one to hear. Since then, every night I feel my reflection watching me more closely. It seems sharper than it should be, more real than the mirror itself. I don't know what to do. I called a priest, but he refused to enter the room. Now I'm thinking of moving out, but I'm afraid that wherever I go, it will follow me.
I never thought I'd experience anything like this, and I still don't know what to think about what happened last night. I've been a babysitter for years. I've seen plenty of strange things, sure, but nothing that compares to what happened yesterday. I had received a call from a new couple. They found me through a babysitting app and needed someone to watch their 2 kids while they went to an event out of town. The couple seemed friendly, the pay was good, and I needed the money, so I took the job without a second thought. I arrived at their house around 6 p.m. It was a big house, but not intimidating, with a slightly worn facade and a poorly maintained garden, like the owners didn't have much time to keep up with maintenance. The couple welcomed me with a smile, but there was something in their eyes, a kind of tiredness, or maybe worry. The mom, especially, seemed a bit nervous. The boys, aged 8 and 5, were polite and playful, very easy to handle. They showed me around the house, the phone, the emergency numbers, and the mom said something that caught my attention. "If you need anything at all, call us immediately," she said, in a tone that almost seemed like she was pleading. I nodded, thinking it was odd, but didn't give it much thought. At 9:30 p.m., after playing games and watching a movie, I put the boys to bed. They fell asleep quickly, which was a relief. I went downstairs and sat in the living room, turned on the TV at a low volume, and started scrolling through my phone. That's when I heard it for the first time, the sound of footsteps coming from upstairs. I lifted my head immediately, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. It was a soft sound, but clear, like someone was walking down the hallway. I thought one of the boys had gotten up, so I went upstairs to check. I opened the bedroom door slowly and saw that both were fast asleep. I went back to the living room, feeling a little uneasy. A few minutes later, I heard it again. The same footsteps, but this time they were closer, slower, almost dragging. My heart started beating faster. I grabbed the phone and called the parents, but it went straight to voicemail. The nervousness began to take over. I thought about leaving the house, but something made me stay. Then I heard a laugh. Not a cheerful laugh, but a low, almost whispering laugh. I turned my gaze to the corner of the room and saw, for a brief moment, a woman standing there, with her back to me. She was there, motionless, and my body froze. In the blink of an eye, she was gone. I felt the air leave my lungs. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed my phone again and called the parents, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped the device. When they finally answered, I told them what had happened, trying to keep my voice steady. They seemed strangely calm but told me to wait outside, that they were coming back immediately. While I waited, I decided to look out the window to see if they were coming. That's when I noticed someone standing outside, in the shadow of a tree, watching me. I couldn't see their face clearly, but I could feel their eyes on me. I stood still, trying to process it. Then, he took a step forward and vanished into the darkness. When the parents arrived, they were nervous but tried to hide it. They paid me quickly and thanked me, but there was something in their eyes, something I couldn't decipher. The mom seemed particularly agitated, like she knew something I didn't. On my way home, I received a message from an unknown number. Did you see my mother? She always waits for me in that room. Since then, I feel like something is wrong. I feel like there's more to that house than they told me. And the scariest part, I feel like whatever was in that house knows me now, too.